Welcome to BIZPHYX Video on Demand. Today's educational video, entitled An Introduction to the Cost of Poor Quality, or CoPQ, is being presented by BIZPHYX Senior Consultant Irv Briks. Irv has over 40 years of quality management, supply chain, and engineering experience in the telecommunications industry. He has an extensive background in ICT quality that includes process engineering, operations, project management, supplier audits, and vendor management. Active in Quest Forum, Irv is a TL9000 expert. He has been chair of several working committees and participated in the Quest Forum Leadership Council. In 2014, he was nationally recognized as a Quest Forum Fellow. Irv has also served as judge and senior examiner for the State of Georgia Baldrige Quality Process and as a two-time examiner for the National Baldrige Quality Award Process. Irv is a certified quality auditor, a certified manager of quality and organizational excellence, and a certified purchasing manager. Irv is also a member of the American Society for Quality and the Institute of Industrial Engineers. In this webinar, Irv clearly presents concepts such as the cost of quality and the cost of poor quality, and provides practical examples of how you can apply these concepts to improve the overall profitability of your organization. You'll learn how to focus on reducing CoPQ as part of your business planning. Contact information will be available at the end of this course, and Irv is available to assist your organization with implementing the concepts in this webinar. Here is Irv Briks.
Hi, this is Irv Briks, and welcome to this presentation. This will be an introduction to the cost of poor quality. So we will start with some definitions in theory and then look at some examples of how you can apply the concept to your organization to increase profitability. The last slide will have contact information. Let's start with some basic definitions and concepts. So we have the cost of quality, CoQ, versus the cost of poor quality, CoPQ. Quality costs, CoQ, can be thought of in large buckets. For example, prevention includes planning, testing, risk analysis, failure modes and effects analysis. Appraisal would include inspection and also some testing. Internal failure, which is costs that you incur inside of your own company, would include scrap, rework, and some hidden costs, and we'll talk about hidden costs in a little bit. External failure occurs when the failure impacts your customer directly. That would include returns, warranty, and again, some hidden costs. So the costs of poor quality, which is what our focus is, are costs that would disappear if systems, processes, and products were perfect. That's hardware, software, and services. That includes failure costs and some portion of appraisal. Cost of poor quality is how much money a non-conforming condition costs your organization. Here's another part of the theory behind quality costs. Philip Crosby wrote a book called Quality is Free and took a lot of grief from folks who only looked at the title. The premise is that investing in quality has a payback in lowering the overall costs of poor quality. The figure shows higher prevention but lower appraisal and failure costs for an overall reduction in cost to the organization. Just as information, the bars do not reflect the actual relative amounts of costs that you may be experiencing. Most likely your current green or prevention costs are smaller and your red failure costs are higher in proportion. I mentioned hidden costs. Quality costs are like an iceberg, where only 10% is visible above the water. In this iceberg example, the hidden below the surface costs can have a far greater impact on the organization and its profitability and customer relationships than the obvious costs. You may not be measuring those visible, obvious costs, scrap, sorting, reprocess, rework, but I'm sure you're aware of them. You're aware of failure costs, I'm sure. Many folks, though, don't associate the hidden costs with quality issues. Inventory, time value of money, extra setups, extra administration, lost sales can all be attributable to insufficient quality. Those hidden costs are harder to measure, and we don't actually recommend starting with them as a first initiative to reduce costs. But be aware that if you reduce those obvious or visible costs, you're likely picking up savings in the hidden ones at the same time. To expand the definition, let's think about your organization's supply chain. The costs to the end customer accumulate throughout the supply chain. Companies can work proactively with their suppliers and customers to reduce their overall cost of poor quality. Companies can collaborate to identify the root causes of quality problems and implement corrective actions. So, for example, if there were 4 companies in a supply chain, and each with an output quality of 98%, which you might think of as pretty good, the total cost to the end customer would really include an extra 8% of additional cost. So, for example, we could improve our supply chain's external failure costs by 1% in each one of the 4 companies. We could reduce prices or increase our margins proportionally. You can also think of this in terms of the internal processes within your organization. Each step in your internal provisioning of your product or service that isn't perfect has a similar multiplier effect on the cost of the prior steps. Some have called this the 1-10-100 rule, where it might take you 10 times as much to fix a problem further in your process than prevent or catch it earlier. How do we actually measure the cost of poor quality in an actionable way? Well, for example, Quest Forum, a quality organization, has a number of measurements that are built into the Quest Forum standards. And all of these measurements are normalized or put into a ratio or percentage form, such as a failure rate or a percent on-time delivery. Similarly, we can normalize cost of poor quality as a percent of sales. The boxes in this slide are examples of some internal and external failure costs that may be measurable and shown in this way. Of course, some of the hidden costs, like lost sales or excess capacity, may be more difficult to quantify, but there are some ways to estimate those. So as a thought exercise, what would you estimate for your company's cost of poor quality? 2%, 5%, 10 or 20%? Let's take a few seconds and think about your appraisal, internal failure, and external failure costs. Let me also go back to the iceberg example to help you think about it. So failure costs, appraisal costs, some are obvious, some are hidden. What might your organization's cost of poor quality as a percent of sales be? So let's go to the next slide and see what some experts think. Experts have estimated cost of poor quality may amount to 5 to 30% of gross sales for a manufacturing and service company. Other studies have revealed that cost of poor quality costs companies millions of dollars each year. Most executives, however, don't believe that their cost of quality is more than 5%. They don't even know what it is in many cases. In the book Success Through Quality, the author estimates cost of poor quality for an average company at about 20% of sales. So do you believe 20%? Well, if you don't, you're probably not alone. My brother-in-law, for example, runs a small plating company. I couldn't convince him of 20% of sales. I'm not going to convince anyone on this call or webinar either. I'll just ask you to keep an open mind about the concepts while we work through some examples using smaller numbers that you should be able to buy into. So here's where we're going. I believe that aside from some of the obvious costs, such as failure, most folks have not established an objective data collection and measurement system that portrays cost of poor quality. The key is you don't have to go after all of the costs to make a significant impact. The idea is to prioritize and pick certain areas to focus on, one step at a time. We'll look at some examples in the upcoming slides after looking at a profitability concept on the next slide. So we'll take an example company, and we're going to assume that their current sales are $500,000 in this first column. The cost of goods sales we'll estimate at 60% or $300,000, and so they have a gross profit of $200,000. They also have an operations cost, everything it takes to actually keep the business running, and that's currently running at $200,000. So unfortunately, this company has zero current operating profit. Well, that's unfortunate, and certainly we want to change that. So let's figure out how can we improve our profitability. Well, one way is to increase our sales. What if we could increase our sales by 20%? Let's take a look at how the numbers work. So in the middle column, we're going to increase sales by 20%, so we're going to go up to $600,000 of sales revenue. Our cost of goods sales sold has to increase proportionally 60%, so that's $360,000. Gross profit is now $240,000. Our operations cost also has to increase somewhat. To get those increased sales, we're going to have to spend some money on marketing, maybe some more on salespeople. Certainly some of our administrative and production costs are going to go up, but not in full proportion. So the good news is our operations cost has only gone up $220,000, and we now have an operating profit of $20,000. Well, so that's certainly better, and that's a good thing. But it may not be so easy to increase sales. Let's look at an alternative. What if we could decrease our failure costs, our cost of poor quality? So we'll start with an example. We're still at our $500,000 of sales. We still have our cost of goods sold at $300,000, our gross profit of $200,000. What if we could decrease our cost of poor quality by 5% of sales? Well, that's $25,000. We might not do it all at once. We might have several initiatives, each contributing some improvement to those poor quality costs. So we're still going to try and get 5% of sales reduction in poor quality. That's $25,000. And guess what? It drops directly to operating profit, $25,000. Any reduction in costs of poor quality drop directly to your operating profit. It's a 1-to-1 ratio. So look at what we've got. We could increase our sales by 20% and come up with profit. We could reduce our cost of poor quality by 5% and come up with some operating profit. They're both possible. Which do you think is easier? Do you think you can increase your sales in the short run by 20% very easily? I'm willing to bet you could decrease your cost of poor quality in short run by some significant amount. How would we actually do this? Well, there's some principles to trying to come up with addressing rework, for example, and cost of poor quality. First of all, you need to know your operations. You can take your production and services and break them down into discrete activities. And this applies to hardware, software, or services. You all have activities. We can look at them. We can list those activities. Better yet, we could put them into a flow chart and do some process analysis and some flowchart analysis and break them down into reasonable size blocks of major activities. We can then cost those activities out, and we can do that reasonably accurately by looking at the total cost and then figuring out what would rework costs be in using those same activities. We can monetize our cost of poor quality, and by reducing that cost, we can improve the amount of money in our bucket. We can use that for profit, or we could use it for building our business. So let's look at an example. Company A has a contract to maintain network systems. The company must meet certain restoration times or be penalized. In a recent incident, the wrong circuit pack was installed and a new one had to be expedited. An installer had to be dispatched to do the job over again. We can calculate the cost for one of these incidents. We can look at pull, pack, and ship costs for managing a replacement pack. We also know there's going to be a truck roll to actually do the installation. So there's labor involved in the pull, pack, and ship. There's labor and some overhead. There are some true shipping costs for expediting. We may need to get a new circuit board into the hands of our remote installer and expedite that, or we may even have to have one shipped into our warehouse. So there are shipping costs. For each one of these kinds of costs, we can come up with a cost per unit. We know our labor rates. We know what an expedited shipping cost is using one of the common carriers. We also can estimate how long it actually takes to process a return and to process the expediting. So you can see there's 0.2 hours, 4 hours for the actual truckload. We can come up with the total cost per incident of $250 approximately. Now, we're not really worried about the specific minutes or fractions of a minute or fractions of a dollar. Let's estimate that $250 and go forward with that. So per incident, if it's $250, how many incidents a year? Well, we'll use 15 incidents. There were 15 occurrences of installing an incorrect circuit board. We can expand the dollars out, and we come up with $3,700 yearly cost of poor quality for this one type of incident. Now, we can then look at this and figure out what do we do. How do we want to reduce the $3,700? Well, the truckload is a truck roll is pretty costly. Can we reduce that? Maybe not so easily. Wouldn't it be preferable to reduce the number of incidents of a bad installation? Not only would that affect all of the costs, we could result in an increase in our customer satisfaction where this actually is a problem to them. So that would be the direction. We would then attack the issue of why did we have an incorrect circuit pack installed in the first place. Now, you might be thinking $3,700 is not a lot of money, and it may not be. This is just one occurrence of one kind of a failure. I suspect we have several different kinds of failure going on in our organization. If we multiply this by all of our different kinds of failures, pretty soon you're talking real money. Let's look at a second example. A software company has committed a product roadmap that calls for 2 major releases a year along with required maintenance. Release dates are slipping, and development managers say they don't have enough resources. Development and maintenance share the same engineering resources, and the company can't afford to hire additional staff at this time. The number of bugs that have to be fixed is rising, and our employees are treading water because they don't think anything can be done to improve the situation. Well, we can construct a simple chart, a matrix, to try to understand what's going on. So for each bug, we need some engineering analysis to figure out what the problem is. We then have to do some coding to fix the software. We need to test it with some verification, and we need to implement that fix into our software process. Now, we know the hourly rates of our engineers. That's pretty straightforward. We can also estimate how long does it cost, how long does it take to fix the bug, how long does it take to analyze it, to recode it, to test it. So we're going to assume we have 200 instances of bugs this year. And we can just do our simple multiplication and come up with $82,000 worth of engineering time involved in fixing bugs. We know we're short of engineering time. So what if we could reallocate this time from fixing bugs to doing something more productive? All right, good idea. How do we do that? Well, we can take those 200 bugs and categorize them. Let's look at what are the causes of why did we even get those bugs to begin with. So we came up with 5 major potential causes, and we looked at the 200 and threw them into those potentials. Well, unclear requirements between ourselves and our customers caused 100 of the bugs. Our test cases being a little weak and not capturing some of them before the software release accounted for 55 of the bugs. And some of our engineers were not as trained as they should be, so we can attribute a few of the bugs to them. Our test equipment was in pretty good shape, no problem there. And we determined that our regression testing, meaning that when we built those bugs back into our software, the fixes to those bugs, we actually caused some other bugs. And so that's not such a good thing, but there were 30 of those. Well, where do we start? We're going to apply the Pareto principle, or the 80-20 rule, and we can see that the unclear requirements and the weak test cases is the vast majority of our problem. So that is where we would focus our attention. We would then try to determine why are we having unclear requirements issues. What can we do to clarify that? How can we work with our customer to clarify the requirements to reduce that number? Our test cases not being strong enough, we can certainly address those and build some more robust software into our testing to make sure we capture those. So we may not get to be perfect on all of this, but we can certainly reduce the magnitude. And if we can reduce that $80,000 by $40,000, we can reallocate all of those engineering hours to a faster software cycle. We can get the software out of the door faster. We can make sure it works when it gets to our customers. By doing this, we can actually recognize our revenue sooner. Our customers will start paying us sooner. We may be able to get more customers because we have a better product. This can drive right to not only the bottom line of fewer failure costs, but improved sales and revenue. So, reducing cost is hard work. There's no really easy way of doing this. There's no magic bullet, but you can get started. And you do this a bite at a time. So you can establish a team, and because we're talking costs, you probably want to include accounting or have interface with accounting to help you work out the cost parts of this. You want to have interface with your production and warehousing and engineering folks so that they can contribute and agree with what's going on in your company. When we talk about a team here, this doesn't have to be a big team. It might be a couple people. It may be a few hours a week with certain people. But you want to address this in some kind of a focused way, one at a time. Don't drain the swamp. Start with one project and in an area that you have influence and can get cooperation. Start with your obvious costs, those non-hidden areas in the iceberg. Use a known issue like returns or scrap or warranties. Pick one that's actually bite-sized that you can actually work on. But pick something that also has some value, where once you look at the costs, you actually will be able to recognize those savings. Again, use accounting to estimate the costs and to get their buy-in that you've actually done something good. Because when accounting buys in, you can also get your management to buy in and continue the process. So you'll use various tools to actually do the improvement. There's many tools. You for sure will use flow charting. You'll do some process analysis. There may be other quality tools. that you'd use to actually improve your internal process. So, in summary, what do you need to do? Well, if you don't recognize there's an issue, you're never going to get started with it. So you need to do a little bit of education to even share the concepts of cost of poor quality. You may have to do some training in how to do cost estimation, how to do flow charting if you've not done it. It's not hard. We're not talking heavy-duty training here. And most folks already know how to do a lot of this. The key is prioritization. Let me stress that again. You already know some of your key pain points with your customers. You have failure rates. You have customers calling you. You have returns. You know your scrap rates. Focus on a key item. Prioritize on that. Just work that one and see what you can do to improve it. Once you improve one, pick the next one. Then you can go on and try to build in this kind of thinking and continual improvement into your business and into your planning. So I know it's hard to get started on something that might be new or unfamiliar to you. So here's our contact information. BIZPHYX believes in improving the industry, its supply chains, and its individual companies. So if you want to talk to us about how to implement these concepts in your organization, please just reach out to us. And thank you for the time in attending this session.